In my preparation for today's podcast, I came across this interesting question. What's the difference between honesty and integrity? Honesty, integrity. That got me thinking. I'm going to share my thoughts at the end of this podcast, but that's not the main point of today's podcast. Today's podcast is about admitting mistakes, especially for us as young men. Young men admitting mistakes with integrity, the roadmap to courageous growth. One of the best ways that I think we can grow in courage is by learning to admit our mistakes. And this sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to just kind of dive into why I believe courage is best accentuated when we have opportunities to admit our mistakes. This is something tremendously difficult for us as young men because for most of us, we've grown up to present this front of competence, that we haven't done anything wrong, of infallibility, and there's tremendous pressure for us to be operating on this plane where we don't let the ball drop. We are always on point that way. A huge part of that is driven by these challenges that we have imbibed, where we have a fear of judgment. There's, of course, societal expectations as well. Ego and pride are a huge part of that. And my assertion, my premise that I'm working off of today is how can we undo these elements that I've just described and learn to admit when we make mistakes and see that in a different limelight and see that in a different narrative. Whereas once upon a time, we may have thought, or we may still think actually, that admitting mistakes is definitely a sign of weakness and that's something that we should avoid at all costs. My challenge is how can we instead see admitting mistakes as a courageous act? As a courageous act that is honest and true to our very nature as human beings who are not designed to be perfect. The reality is we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to drop the ball sometime. And how can we learn, especially as young men, to be able to imbibe that element of our framework in a way that is holistic, in a way that is honest, in a way that says, actually, it takes courage to be able to say, I was wrong. I did this wrong. I am taking responsibility for it. So let's talk about some of the significant elements of admitting mistakes and the benefits of it. But like I say, the key important point that I want to make today is that one of the best ways to grow in courage and in integrity is for us to learn how to admit our mistakes and to do so without trying to minimize or mitigate it. One of the things or significant elements of admitting mistakes is that it's a catalyst for our personal growth. Have you ever thought about this? When you admit your mistakes, when we learn to admit our mistakes, this is a fantastic catalyst for us to grow personally. Because when we do so, we gain insights into where we're still needing to work on in our lives. When we're open to admitting mistakes, it's our way of acknowledging, saying, oh, here's an area where I need to work on, where I need to grow personally in my evolution. And so it's a fantastic zone for personal growth. We don't experience growth when we negate our mistakes. When we say, I didn't do anything wrong, and we've missed an opportunity there to be able to say, oh, here's what actually happened here. Here's how I can get better as a result. And that incorporates so many elements from honesty to perhaps a change in patterns of behavior, to commitments in the way that you live out your life, the habits that you incorporate in your daily process. All of this can be addressed when we are willing to admit our mistakes. We learn to see that these are opportunities in our day, these moments that come along when we make mistakes, where we can evolve and we can become better. Now, we look for countless of ways of how we can experience life better. We see so many ways, for example, let's say that your placement of your screens at your workplace is not working. Maybe you're looking too high up, that's a problem. If you don't admit that problem, then you're going to get stuck with it and you're going to be in discomfort for a longer period. What do? We look for ways to fix the problem. We say, I'm going to bring those screens down so that I don't have to crane my neck and gain back issues as well. We look for ways of solving those problems. Why don't we do the same when it comes to our personal development, when we make mistakes, which we do on a regular daily basis? Why don't we learn to acknowledge those and use that as a catalyst to get better, to grow in our evolution as individuals and to develop personally? This is a win-win when we learn to admit our mistakes. Further, we build honesty and integrity as we practice admitting our mistakes. Now, I just gave you a teaser at the beginning saying, I got to thinking, what is the difference between honesty and integrity? I've got some ideas. I'm going to share them at the end of this conversation, so stick around and let me know your thoughts and see if you agree. But we build honesty and integrity as we practice admitting our mistakes. You see, people grow in respect for us when they see us being honest with them. Do you know what it's like when you are talking to someone and they tell you a lie that they're trying to get away with, but you know that's a lie? Do you know that feeling that you have where you're like, I see you, I see what you're trying to do here, and I'm not buying it, you know? There's that sense of diminishing of respect maybe a little bit, and definitely trust, saying, I don't think I can truly trust everything you say to me now, right? Well, that's what we're doing when we don't take the opportunity to admit our mistakes. When we don't take the opportunity to admit our mistakes, it's like our way of saying, I'm going to try and pass you a lie and hopefully you buy it. And the reality is, you and I don't even know you well. I don't even know you at all, I don't think, who are listening. But I do know you very intimately. I don't know you in the particulars. I don't know what your dreams are. I don't know what your hopes are. I don't know all of these things. But what I do know is that you're a fellow human being like I am, who by nature, like me, we're imperfect and we make mistakes. I know that for sure. And so knowing that, it helps me now to be able to say very definitively that we can be honest with each other and say, I made a mistake. I goofed up. That's expected. That's what we are as human beings. We go so often through this life trying to present perfection. We try to present ourselves as not having done anything wrong, and that's so dishonest. It's so dishonest. The reality is every single one of us, you, myself, we make mistakes on an ongoing basis. In fact, let me just address this even now. The very fact that I'm establishing this platform here on the theme of integrity, talking and exploring all things integrity, doesn't mean that I'm going to be an ace at it. I'm going to drop the ball as I pursue walking in integrity. I'm going to be less compelling at some points along the way, maybe because of things that I say or things that I do. But the important part is, are we willing, are we ready, are we going to embrace those opportunities to admit our mistakes? When we're honest, and when we pursue integrity with honesty and saying, I dropped the ball, I didn't do what I needed to do, what tends to happen is it's an opportunity for others to say, okay, you're being truthful. And it's just one of those things that would be in our benefit to learn sooner than later. Moreover, it's a superpower, I think, when we are able to admit our mistakes, because we can see these mistakes as opportunities. That's like a life hack right there. When you see those times when you drop the ball or when you make a mistake, regardless of how catastrophic it is, this is an amazing opportunity for you to have insight into yourself and say, whoa, I'm seeing something here that's really helpful. And not many people see it this way. Many people have a different sort of response where they're like, oh, stupid me, or why did I do this or that? They beat themselves up. What would it look like for us to be able to say, ooh, this is an opportunity here that I can grow into? At work, for example, I have a new role. Excuse me. I love yawning, by the way, and so when you see me yawn, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm tired. I just, there's something satisfying about a yawn. And I don't tell this to everyone except for my closest friends, but I actually rate my yawns. I rate my yawns 1 out of 10, and that yawn was probably an 8 out of 10. It was almost satisfying. It was good. It was good. So when you see me yawn, it's not because I'm bored. It's not because I'm tired. It's most likely because I take the opportunity to yawn and stretch my lungs, and oh, it's good. Back to our programming. This is a superpower when you can see your mistakes as key opportunities for growth, personal growth. At work, like I was saying, I have a new role in management, and it's been a learning curve, a really steep learning curve. I've made many mistakes along the way. And even as I do so, and I sit down with my supervisor and we kind of go over them, and I, take responsibility for them. Those are opportunities. I'm like, all right, noted. Now I know this. Now I know to watch for here. I know what to do here, and I know how to engage here. All these things are learning opportunities, and it's a superpower when you get to this place, a life hack, if you will, when you can see your mistakes as learning opportunities. Excuse me. Wow, I'm really enjoying the yawns today. Like I say, I'm not bored. I'm just very much enjoying yawns, and I take the opportunity when I get a chance to yawn to enjoy and savor it. Furthermore, we show tremendous emotional intelligence when we learn to admit our mistakes. We show emotional intelligence because when we make mistakes, it requires at some level that we need to manage our emotions. Many people sort of freak out when they make their mistakes. They're like, they fall apart. They're like, I shouldn't have done that, and they beat themselves up. All these things which are really unhelpful. But when we are admitting mistakes, we show emotional intelligence, especially in the way that we calibrate and manage those emotions. Like we will resist the urge to express fear of someone else's perceptions of us, or we will bypass opportunities to evidence shame or vulnerability. Like these things are the ways that we don't want to move towards, and yet we do. But when we show that we're willing to take ownership of our mistakes and acknowledge them, it shows that we are moderating our response and saying, okay, instead of choosing shame, I'm going to choose thoughtfulness or introspectiveness. Okay, I'm learning. I'm being present. I'm being attentive in this moment to be able to learn how to navigate through this experience. We also grow in courage by admitting our mistakes. It's like an opportunity for us to put our ego and our pride aside and say, I'm not going to try and say, I didn't do anything wrong, or that wasn't me, or whatever other expression of your ego is going to take effect. We grow in courage when we say, that's my bad. I did that. I'm going to take responsibility for it. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. It demonstrates authenticity, it demonstrates strength and a willingness to learn. These are beautiful, appealing responses to when mistakes have been brought to your attention. So how can we learn to grow in courage? By stepping into that strength and saying, I'm the one who did it, I'm going to take responsibility, and I'm going to move forward in addressing this. We moreover boost our self-esteem when we embrace our mistakes. It's a way, listen carefully, of saying we are not our mistakes. Probably this is one of the most important points that I want to bring to your attention. So if you haven't been listening up to this point, or if you've just kind of been half listening, just clue in here for a moment or two. We boost our self-esteem when we learn to acknowledge our mistakes because it's our way of declaring that we are not our mistakes, and this enables us to take risks as we go forward in life. You and I, we are not defined by our actions or our mistakes. Our worth is inherently there already as fellow human beings. So we are affirming our self-worth when we refuse to say, oh, darn, I made a mistake, therefore I am a mistake. That does not flow. I made a mistake, but I'm still a worthwhile human being who's going to try again and get this better. That's a much more favorable way of proceeding. Um, One of the things I really try to take an opportunity on this podcast is to look for practical ways whereby I can serve you young men um, in putting to action these things that we're talking about. So what does it look like for us to learn to acknowledge our mistakes and to uh, courageously grow through the experience? One of those ways I would first start by suggesting is um, reflectiveness or self-awareness. Reflect on your actions and your behaviors when you have a mistake that comes to your frame of reference. Look for ways to say, let me think through this right now. Let me reflect on it. Let me think about my actions, my feelings, my engagement in the midst of this. So reflecting is probably a really helpful start. And as you reflect on it, learn to accept responsibility without blaming others. Don't move into this zone that so many of us have learned to do so well at a young age, saying, it was really your fault, actually. It was my fault. And we sort of try to wash our hands of responsibility. Or sometimes we'll say, I may have done that, but it was also this other person, and they were the ones who were the catalyst. It reminds me of a story in the Bible, the first story in the Bible, actually, with Adam and Eve, when the story goes that there was this one fruit on the tree that they were not supposed to eat. This one fruit from these multitude of options that they had in this beautiful Garden of Eden. And the nemesis, Satan, came and convinced the woman Eve to eat this forbidden fruit. So she went ahead and ate it, and then the way the text says it is, she also gave some to her husband Adam, and he ate. And then when they were held to account for their actions, they started this blaming game where Adam says, it was the woman, she gave it to me, so she's responsible, let alone the fact that he made his own decision to eat it. And the woman, she points to the snake, the serpent, and says, it was the snake that made me eat it. And no one, and ever since then, I think, we have this tendency to attach blame to others, where we can sort of absolve ourselves. And that's not really walking with integrity, especially in the realm of admitting mistakes. When you admit your mistakes, after reflecting on it, do so without blaming others. They may be implicated, maybe, but let them be responsible for their own walk. You figure out your own walk, because you have more than enough work just working on yourself. Learn to take responsibility without blaming others, saying, I'm sorry, I did do that. Take responsibility for the things that you need to take responsibility for and move on from there. Acknowledge your part and be willing to rectify the mistakes when it's been brought to your attention. For me at work, for example, in my new role, I'm having to learn how to, no, I'm not having to learn, I'm actually doing this. I'm having to learn how to do a lot of new things, but as I make mistakes, I am definitely taking responsibility for them and saying, okay, how do I make this better? How do I acknowledge my part in this? Recognize further that we all make mistakes. We, by definition, as human beings, are imperfect. We aren't designed to get this perfect right off the bat. It is such what a really challenging dynamic to live a life that has this strong expectation that you're never going to drop the ball. Like that's so stressful. Recognize we all make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, admitting or learning to admit our mistakes is actually courageous. It's not weak, it is courage on display in a massive way. So learn to see that your mistakes that you make are just part of this human life that we live, and we shouldn't be shocked when it happens. I'm often troubled and perplexed, not perplexed, actually more troubled, when I see, for example, in the news, like maybe some celebrity has done something terrible, and so now they're being ripped apart because of the things that they did that we all do on an ongoing basis. And the fact is, we've forgotten culturally that we are equal in this space of trying to figure out how to live this best life that we can, while accommodating and acknowledging that we don't get it all right all the time. And so that's really important. That's really important. How can we learn to do that? in a way that still facilitates our humanity. We can also learn to embrace humility and look for opportunities to let the ego go, to let pride go. When we make mistakes, it's a fantastic chance for us to say, I dropped the ball on this one here. I'm gonna try to get better. That's like, and that's a way that we can move into this space of humility when we acknowledge the reality, saying, I could have done that better. I see that now and I want to step into that. I want to take ownership of that. So it's really important. A really important component is learning how to be able to take that kind of onus and saying, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing well, but I'm going to do so in a way that still leaves me accessible. And that's one of the things I love about humility. Humility is accessible. When I meet people who have humility, I say, I want to spend time around that individual. I want to have them rub off on me. It's one of the biggest character traits that I want to grow on personally. And so I'm drawn to it. I find it extremely attractive. I want to move away from expressions of ego and pride, and I want to move more into humility. I want to embrace it. And what a better way than to admit mistakes? When we make them, to admit it and say, I did that, I'm going to take ownership for that. So we also can seek feedback from people whom we trust in our lives, people who we've come to acknowledge, saying, these are my safe people. And as we do so, how can we seek feedback from them as we are learning through our mistakes that we're admitting? How can we learn to intentionally and actively ask our friends for that kind of input? Now, listen carefully. As you look for this kind of feedback from your trusted friends and family members or coworkers or whoever they may be, whoever those individuals are, as you learn to seek feedback, remember on their side that this is not a natural thing. Most people don't necessarily give critical feedback. It's an uncomfortable thing. They feel like they're judging someone. They feel like they're being harsh. And so you have to follow through, and this is what I do in the context of my friendships, the closest ones. I go to them and say, listen, I need your help in watching this area. I'm dropping the ball on this X, Y, or Z, and I would like for you to help me get better in this. I find, for example, that I am always showing up late for our get-togethers, and that bothers me. I'm trying to be better. I acknowledge my mistake, and that I keep on, working on my time management, and it's not working quite yet. So you could look for ways of getting their participation and saying, hey, could you help me through this? Would you be willing to help me through this? And when I ask you this, I'm really asking in a rubber meets the road way. If you don't do this, I'm going to come and ask you again, why aren't you doing this? I need you to do this. You're in essence helping them to be comfortable with stepping into a new space that is unfamiliar for them so that they can be a part of your journey and your walk this way. So that's really important. How can we seek feedback from our trusted friends and follow through on ensuring that they do so should they be willing? Some may say, I'm not willing, that's not my jam. Respect that. But for those who say yes, then say, okay, I'm really serious when I ask you this, and I need you to give me that kind of feedback. And that helps affirm them when they do take that risky step of saying, can I bring something to your attention or to your awareness? And you can move on from there. And then learn to view mistakes as opportunities. I heard this podcast recently, I don't remember which one, but the story that was presented says that this one individual made a mistake that cost their company like a couple of $1 million. And so, anticipating being fired, they were royally shocked when after their assessment of the mistake, they were put back on the job, like in their post, and they said, doesn't this bother you that I made this mistake that cost us this much money? And the company said, yeah, but what we see this is as a $2 million lesson. Now that you've learned it, you're not going to do that again, and that's our cost to making sure that we can collectively and cohesively make our goals. And so I thought that was a brilliant way of outlining what it is that we're aiming for here, and that is that we can view our mistakes as opportunities, not as waste of time or things that we can't learn and grow from. It sucks when we make mistakes. Sometimes it's even more devastating depending on the caliber of how the mistake was made, but it's important for us to start rewriting a new story in our minds of how we approach mistakes. It's no longer oh man, I just dropped the ball and I was so wrong. Instead, it's something different along the lines of, um, this is an opportunity I'm not going to forget, and I want to ensure that when I have this come up again in the future, I'm going to do better. One of the ways I do this for my employer is I'll say something like, when I make a mistake, I'm like, I'm going to note this mistake here, and I don't think you should see it anymore. Like, I anticipate you're not going to see this mistake anymore because I have locked in here what I need to do to make this work really well. And so that's one of the ways that I've found helpful to doing that. Um, Final couple of points: be kind and patient with yourself when you're learning to admit your mistakes. Be kind and patient because our normal response usually is to beat ourselves up ruthlessly and say, oh, we'll speak a language in our minds to ourselves that's so abrasive and so demeaning and so judgmental and so abusive. Things we would never say to anyone else, like, how can you be such an idiot, or you're so stupid, or all these things that go through our minds. Be kind and be patient with yourself. Remember, you weren't designed to be perfect. This is the opportunity that you're stumbling into where you're learning how to be better. And so along those lines, be patient. Take your time. Give yourself space and time to evolve and become a better version of you. And learn to forgive yourself. Seek supportive community that celebrates honesty and integrity. There's those two words matched up again. What is the difference between honesty and integrity? Here's my proposal. I would say honesty has more to do with speaking the truth in the moment. Saying, okay, here's honesty. Right now, I'm talking to you. I'm looking at my camera and I'm talking to you. That's honesty right there. That's transparency as well, too. Honesty and transparency. There's this way of just saying, here's what's presently the truth to me right now. I'm sitting down in my home in this little booth here, making an address to you, you young men. Well, honesty. And then integrity is, it encompasses honesty. So I feel integrity, if it were seen as a pie, honesty would just be a piece of that pie. And I've just described what honesty is. It's telling the truth, especially as you are in the moment. But integrity seems to me more to do with the motivations of an individual, the value system from which they're working and operating off of, and their actions that they're actually exemplifying. So, like I've used my often go-to example is lying or dishonesty. And maybe just because I can really resonate with those. But when I think of that as an example, honesty would be saying something like, I was about to lie, but I refused. And I said, what I told you was the truth. That's an example. Integrity is, here's the why behind the how. Honesty is the how. I'm telling the truth. Integrity has more to do with why, and it supports and undergirds that ballast. And so integrity says, I believe that transparency is important for all of my social connections, from work to personal life. And so when I speak honestly, the why behind the how is the honesty in the moment when I'm sharing it, but the why is the integrity piece that says, I see this world with the way that we can all connect and engage and get along in this specific way. And so that's the big difference. The big difference between honesty and integrity, again, is honesty is a piece of integrity. It says, here's the truth right now. Integrity has more to do with values that one subscribes to and makes that holistic package emanate in a really strong way. So that's sort of some of my thoughts on honesty and integrity. My dear young men, at the end of this address here, at the end of this conversation, my strong encouragement to you would be, how can you courageously admit your mistakes? How can you walk into that space with boldness and saying, I was wrong? Such a difficult 3 words for so many young men to say. Don't make that a pattern in your life. Learn to admit your mistakes from a very young age. Do so courageously, because as you do so, you're going to face the fear of judgment. You're going to face the trials that are going to come your way by way of ego and social expectations, all these things that sort of diminish our access to how to walk courageously, especially by admitting mistakes. Instead, shift the narrative in your mind and start remembering that it's actually a superpower, a strength for us to be able to walk in integrity and to be able to admit our mistakes when we make them. We were not designed to be perfect, so stop trying to be perfect. When you make a mistake, say something like, I did that, I'm so sorry, let's figure out how to make this work. So we grow in emotional intelligence, we grow deeper in our character as people, and then we also grow deeper in the relationships that we're forging and establishing with others around us. Admitting mistakes with integrity, not an easy thing for many young men, hence why we're talking about it. And as we talk about it, my strong challenge would be go and do likewise. Go and make this your own. Go and start practicing incrementally, small by small, with people you're trusting. Let me tell you one of my truths right now, and so that's really important. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Inspiring Young Men to Integrity with me, Biniam, your host. I will see you on the next video. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.